more about running the game. And I know I'm always not doing what I need to be doing because I've got so many other things going on. But it's not reasonably fair for more people who listen and stuff to expect videos and not receive them. So I want to keep up and let you know how things are going in the gaming world as far as I see them. It's a kind of interesting time. Now, I know a lot of you more likely know that Daggerheart and both Matt and Matt Coville's game Draw Steel have come out, and they're looking good. I haven't seen a whole lot of it yet, nor have I actually played it with anyone more than a peripheral amount of a battle or so, just to see how the sort of the mechanics work. But I haven't seen the role playing aspects yet. But like all good RPGs, the RPG portion or the role playing is usually taken best with having the DM running the game and doing that. And I was listening to Matt talk about him running the game, and he had put out a video just recently on how much does your backstory matter. Now, he was talking about you making your backstory, and then, of course, on the DM side, him fleshing out his campaign, however he's going to do it, whatever he's running his own or doing modules, whatever combination, plus the set of rules. And he pointed out, of course, as the game begins, everybody wants to sort of get included, and some people are more interested in a backstory, and some are more or less interested in a backstory. In my game group, we had a lot of that. Matt was, I think, sort of in the middle. He did a lot of prep on his game, story-wise, but him being a writer, you can understand that. And he did some backstory on his character if he was into something that he wanted to do, like some kind of interesting magic-using paladin or something. And that was just dependent upon the game. But it was always variable depending on what the backstory of the game was going to be, and then trying to fit into that. And that's sort of how I tend to look at it, too. I try to run a character that looks like it's going to fit into the game. That's actually not what I came on to talk about. I've been sitting here for a while figuring out a video to talk to you about that I thought would be very helpful. Especially for those who are running your own material and running your own campaigns and putting things together, even if it's matching modules up in whatever game system you're using. That was the other evening I took the wrong miniature box to my game campaign. Now, I'm playing my Enlightened game, so I had my fairy box all ready to go so that the players who are down there living in the Fae are having to deal with the creatures that I have as antagonists to the Fae, plus the Fae themselves in case, well, they get on the wrong side of the elves, which, because of the nature of the early dynamics in the game, is not an uncommon situation. Since if you've heard any of my backstory about the games, it's a situation where the Fomorians have been warring with the Fae for a long period of time. The war ended in a big stalemate, essentially, with both sides effectively losing, and the big winners in the game was man. So that in the 300 BC for 200 BC type thing, as the world is revolving, man is becoming more prescient in the world of Albion, which is basically England and Ireland and the adjacents, and anything else you want to throw in. Scotland and all that has become a big area because that's sort of the home of the Fomorians. But what I did is when I got to run the game and I sat down and I opened up my miniature box and realizing, of course, I had brought the wrong box, I thought, what do I do now? Because everybody's here. Everybody's got their characters ready. They all have their anticipation of what this event's going to be and who the bad guys are based upon how the game has been going up till now. And I botched it. Now, I have sort of a history background of being able to run on a dime, and that's basically was the case when I played with the Covilles, when I played with my original game group. If someone showed up or didn't show up or something happened or whatever, and there was always like, we want to run more, can we run another game? Or, oops, I'm not ready to prepare. Hey, is anybody ready to run? And or that type of situation. And in this case, most people knew I was ready to run. And the way I was reasonably ready to run was not that I had prepared 500 adventures. I usually had 2 or 3 adventures prepared, some concept of where I was hoping the story would go, but then, of course, that was always going to be modified by what the players do, so you never know. And thusly, I never write anything out so very rigidly that I don't have a movement. And I really suggest that with DMs. When you're running it, put your ideas in. Matt's video talking about, the backstory, he started to throw a lot of that in there, and I thought, that's really good. And it's really good advice to game masters, because you don't know at the beginning where your campaign's going to go unless you run just a completely rigid, module campaign where you don't know really, you have nothing to do with what's happening, and the players are just following along, and they win and lose based upon their die rolls and their decisions in the module based upon what the modules are doing, which I know if any of you have followed me by any period of time, I hate. I hate a rigid campaign. I think it is a situation in all our games that there is a cooperative storytell. And it really is going to be the players in many ways, especially in my Enlightened game, because with the Enlightenments, sometimes characters become much different as they advance than anybody would have ever planned them, including me running the game. A lot of times our DMs are expecting one thing to happen, and suddenly a certain character gets a bunch of enlightenments in a different, unusual manner, or puts it together in a very unique way that I didn't necessarily anticipate was going to happen, that they change the dynamic of the game. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. When I opened this up, not having the ready adventure, and being the fact that I'm not as spry as I used to be, I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? Well, I looked at what I had, and I said, okay, what bad guy do I have? Well, I had a few vampire bad guys and a couple undead, especially bad guys, and some, demons or something. And then there were some kobolds and a little bit of goblins, and I had some sort of that basic Fomorian thing, because it was my Fomorian box. And I thought, okay, well, we can work this out and come up with a mission right now as literally it is happening. So the first thing I do is I roll out the bad guy and I tell him what his idea is, that the village and some camaraderie and with the new player characters have run into a problem with this bad guy shows up and he's going to do some nefarious thing. And I'm not going to go into all the details because, quite frankly, I made it up and more likely forgot half of it as I went anyway, as is the nature. But the reason I have always been able to do this, more so obviously when I was younger and a little bit more agile, but even now, is I keep 3-ring binders. And what I do in the 3-ring binders is I keep all kinds of interesting things. Dungeons or battle areas or caves or some lair that I have drawn up for a campaign adventure months, in many cases years, in some cases decades ago. And I just keep them in there. And I keep the monsters, different types of creatures that might be in this environment. And it's a lot easier, of course, since I'm doing Albion, because the environment is so much in my heart and in my mind that it's even easier. But since I didn't really have the creatures I wanted to use, I had to use what I had. So I came up with a little concept that seemed to fit in with the whole situation of where our campaign was going and how the players could be impactful in that conversation and in the battles and saving the day, as it were. It works out great. Now, it takes a while and you'll have to accumulate, but like I said, the whole point is don't throw things away. Keep interesting maps, keep interesting adventures, keep interesting modules, keep anything you find that's interesting. Terrain, I use a lot of dungeon tiles and I use a lot of cardboard cutout pieces in different companies that I keep, and I'll keep them with me all the time too. So in case something like this happens, I can just throw down an area or roll out a forest map or put out a map with a little ruin in it or something. And those all are very useful. You're going to use these over and over so people get used to sort of seeing them, even if you're modifying them around or adding or subtracting things from them to make them a little different. But players will get used to the fact that this is that. Here's a river, there's going to be a bridge, there might be a troll under the bridge. All these things, fit into whatever milieu you're playing. And like I said, since mine is a sort of old elven Fomorian troll or goblin giant type bad guys with dwarves and halflings and others all thrown in for a little bit, and all the other folks from the rest of the known world sort of sneaking in here to try to find out how they can take advantage of the situation. A lot of you have heard it, makes sense. You've heard the situations, you've seen sort of the battles and how the game plays. It's so very simple, and it really doesn't matter whether you're playing Arthurian, whether you're playing cyberpunk, space. We're playing Traveler right now on Wednesdays with my friend Craig, and he's running, and it's a lot of fun. RPGs are great. The point with the backstory is all you have in the backstory, to echo Matt, was a story to make the character alive for you. And as you give out maybe 2 sentences of what your character is, the DM can immediately get a thought in his mind of what your character is. Now, they may not match, but they don't need to match now because what you have is perspectives. You have a perspective of what his world is like. He has a perspective of what your character is like, and likely none of those are going to be accurate. But they will be as your character evolves in whatever game system you're using. So the thing to be doing is be light on your feet always and leave things open for different things to do. And again, I talk to those, but it's quick and easy to have things ready in a 3x5 file. In my situation, since we're doing a bestiary, I'm always writing up the new monsters, thinking up new things, thinking of old things, thinking up fairy things. But a lot of times that's input from the players, and that often is very much lost. Matt mentioned that obviously players will complain that no DM is listening to my backstory and trying to fit things into my game. Or the DMs will say, no players are listening to my introduction to the game and all the things that I want to have happen. And so they're not making my game as interesting as it could be because of the fact that they're not evolved. Now, I've played with players like this, playing with one right now. Mark is incredible in building backstory for his own individual game. It's his own content. Even when he's running my game, and as he's been doing, he changed the time period, he moved things around, he riffed around with the rules a little bit to make things that he wanted to try to see how they would work out. And then he made this elaborate history and backstory of what was going on. And 4 or 5 or 6 or 12 NPCs that you could interact with, and all of them had backstories, and all of them had the new art that the computer AIs produced. So they all had pictures, and you can see what they look like. It was very, very cool. And that affects different people differently. But the best thing to tell you is that just reiterate what Matt said, is that it's really a matter for you to be able to see what is in the mind of the person running the game, and he gets to have some brief overview of what he thinks your character is. All of that, it will evolve as the game goes, and it always does. Never be frustrated that someone seems disinterested or not paying attention or not seeing the depth of work that you've put into the game. Just keep it there. If they ignore it, well, those characters are evolving too. And often if you ignore a character and many campaigns go by and you didn't fulfill a mission that maybe was destined for this character or mentioned to you and you just sort of fluffed it off and weren't interested, the new player, as the DM now, can start to say, okay, she's frustrated, he's angry, he's this is what he does. Often, in many cases, my biggest bad guys never existed in the beginning of my campaign. They grew into the campaign with the players. Boen Redcap was one that was absolutely one of the most famous I ever had. All the players who ever played with me through my fantasy campaigns loathed and detested Boen Redcap, last of the great border goblins. He showed up in so many of my campaigns, but really, he was a throwaway goblin leader who just ran when the goblins were losing, and from that point on, wanted revenge on the party and constantly dogged them for years. All through different campaigns and milieus and players and everything else. He became a feature in the game. Really, in many ways, created by the players and their actions. And that, in many ways, is what I think you want to do. Keep your game flexible. You may have a different perspective on your character than the game master does. But as it evolves, you may like his better. Or he may really like your character. And those are the things that are going to be the part of the game that are going to help your campaigns evolve. Even with modules, I mean, as much as I know I harp on it, you really want to run as much of your own content as absolutely possible. Game system doesn't matter. I mean, you're going to play Daggerheart, or you're going to play Enlightened, or if you're going to go right now and jump on and watch Matt Coville's videos on his new take, Draw Steel, you can see how his people play. And remember, all the games change dynamically based upon who's in the game. If I was in Matt's game, there would be an entirely different dynamic to the gameplay that is going to be there now because of the nature of the way I play. If you were to throw Don and Steve and me and a bunch of others into Matt's game, it's an entirely different game. It's going to have different characters with different motivations, and you're going to want to see that. And you're going to want to read the same thing amongst your players and the DM. You're going to want to be interacting with the players and maybe come up with a tag team combat event, especially with us Enlightened, where you'll find that people are going to want to build enlightenments that benefit the rest of the party, because all the parties need to interact. Because of the nature of the way my game runs, even the weakest and crummiest little monsters can wear out a party. Mark started out with a battle with like 100 creatures. Almost everybody died. I mean, these creatures were nothing. I mean, they were as nothing as it was possible to be. And still, because of the nature of how different mechanics in games work, sometimes that can be very dangerous. You need to learn the game while you're learning your characters and while you're learning the backstory of both your character and what you want in the game. And that's really important. But remember, the whole point I'm going to tell you as you DM, keep everything in a box. Don't toss things away initially, and keep looking at it. You can mix and match dungeons you write up. You can find towers that have undergrounds, or you can find all these things and then mix and match on them. Draw your own. Build things with when you use your dungeon tiles and you build stuff, take a picture of it and say, hey, that's a great new underground. I'm going to keep that. And you can come back to it and everything else. As far as the value of all the things that Matt spoke, there they are. You take them. I tend to be the worst DMs getting started in giving you an elaborate backstory. And the reason is often I'm dragged into running a game that I hadn't planned on running. So suddenly I'm putting it together on the fly as we're playing. And the whole point of being able to do that seamlessly enough so that players don't feel like they're getting cheated by getting sort of half a game that nobody really gave a big care about was maybe the only thing guys have made me do. Write down about 20 or 30 names in whatever name set you would have for your characters. Because they're always going to ask me, because they know how I play and how I DM. They're going to say, well, what's this guy's name? And I'm like, well, I don't know. You tell me. Well, that doesn't fly. So you want to have a name that said, oh, it's Gabriel, or it's O'Neill, or it's whatever it is in your setting, or it's Lonmouth, the Elf Lord, and they're like, oh wait, now maybe I put a lot more effort in this than they thought. Maybe it is something I've already fleshed out. So now they take it all more seriously, and that's what you want from your players. Usually, it's why a lot of players like modules, because they think, well, even if it's not good, it's going to be complete. I have found, unfortunately, that's usually not the case. Secondly, I've not found that most times, even good modules sometimes are really lacking in the heart, because it's not giving you the room to react to something stupendous and fabulous that players often do in a game that you're going to want to reward in however so, finding an item. In our game, because some of you have heard of my Teeth of the Dragon, we had a battle the other evening between two heroes who each had a Tooth of the Dragon. Now, one of them was an Ampli-Sayer high elf, and he didn't really like the Fomorians. The other was one carrying Necros, who was a Fomorian troll. And these are normal enemies, but fighting a different, more dangerous evil, they were working together in this situation. And the other thing about it is, these powerful magic epical swords don't necessarily start out giving you all their stuff. They don't know who you are. And no matter what an epic sword, however you want to invoke intelligence, they have some idea of what you are, can sense it. Who can carry the sword? Is the sword good or evil or whatnot? Does it have a high intellect? And what do you have to do? And what is its purpose in its, Draconis and Necros, even though both singing swords, have very different dynamic purposes to add to it. The only power is, because they are singing swords, they start to add the powers to each other, and that's what made them very unique and very powerful. But the thing to remember, keep everything. Be prepared, be flexible. Always write up a bunch of little 3x5 cards with a bad guy and some minion ideas on it. Keep them in a little 3x5 box, or just stick them in your little 3-ring binder folder that you have for ideas in case something happens. One of the best adventures I ever ran is I had a little dragon and a crown 80 to 100 kobolds horde in this little ruined dungeon, and nobody quite knew what it was, but he was in there, and he, the size of the dragon was going to be dependent upon the level of the party. But other than that, all the little kobolds were going to be first level. but there was going to be a bucket of them. And in certain game systems, that's nothing. It doesn't really matter the way the armor is situated, the way the hits are situated. A single individual character could kill 1,000, kobolds type of things because of the nature of the game. But in some games, that's not the case. Very much, of course, in mine, because if you get hit, you take a point of damage. So the objective with ours is to be so skillful as to avoid getting hit so you don't have to depend on your armor. Armor is still nasty and will stop, obviously big monsters from doing big damage to you, but not always the case. So study the way the campaign battles run. D&D, I'm sure, runs very different than what I've seen Matt Colville running. And I haven't played Dragonheart yet, so I can't make a guess there. But Fantasy Trip ran an entirely different way. And I loved Fantasy Trip, and my guys loved it too. It worked great, and it was a very simple game system. Simplicity does not mean the game system is not excellent. I know I talked to you about my Star Garden. I've lost my miniatures and now trying to repaint and rebuild my army. It is an incredibly simple system. But representing what it does, it is a really excellent and dynamic, fast-playing, and realistic battle combat. Now, that's great. And you could make that for a fantasy game just as easily, and I've done so. Or you could make it as complex as you want, and I've done that too. But I think the secret always is the same. As you evolve, help the game master. Feedback information to him. Ask him questions. If he gives you a picture and starts to tell you something and then shuts up, well, ask him. Well, he gave you a picture and he said something about her. So maybe this is going to mean something, to him or her. And they're going to want to expand upon that. So you might add it. Maybe they're going to want to expand now. Or maybe they're going to say, oh, no, he shuffled off into the darkness. But somehow you think he's still around in the area and you see goblins with his little coat of arms or knights with his coat of arms. Or you hear about the fact that he's looking for a shard of some sword that was broken by some horrible monster years ago. Now you're getting little bits of the campaign are getting created by you and by the DM. The cooperative storytelling becomes the great thing. And I don't ever want to harp on it, which I'm sure I do. But the point is, it doesn't matter how you run it. What you want it to do is not be standing still. Do not make your players just think that no matter what they do, they don't have an interaction. They do. And eventually, 90% of what will happen will be based on what the players have done as interacting with your campaign, whether it was stuff you invented, whether it was stuff of modules you used, whether it was a combination of the two, whether you used tales out of books or games, doesn't matter. You want your game to be able to evolve, and that just means that you have to be prepared. And again, for when you make a mistake like mine and you totally bring the wrong game to the wrong night, have a little fire break for yourself where you can suddenly say, oh, this is what happened. You got delayed on the road, or suddenly you're proceeding off to this dungeon that you knew you were going to, and something horrendous happens, or something is terrible happening to these little people and you have to help them. These small halflings or these town folk, or it doesn't make any difference. Any sort of situation that fits into whatever campaign you're running, you immediately change to that and you move into that attitude. You open the 3-ring binder as if you had this prepared all your life, and you start running this game by the seat of your pants, and it runs and it works. And at the end, not only is it a great game, often people will say that was one of the best games you ever ran, which usually means my solitary, all well written out games may not be as good as I thought. But it gives you an idea that you have stretched your skills to the point where you are now a real high-class DM. Matt and Mark and a lot of these guys I knew, when I first was playing with them, I thought they were okay DMs. Now, when I play with all of them, it is a great pleasure. They're all good gamers. Even if Mark, I still think, is a little too wordy and has way more backstory than I can remember, but that's just because I'm getting old. It's still fun to be involved and seeing the effort and the care and how they're envisioning this world and your campaign and story and history moving forward in the game. So until we have a chance to speak again, which is likely to be very soon because I have a couple other things I want to talk to you about. Fight me, devils, fight, for I hate peace. Everybody have good gaming and game on.